200,000 copies monthly, or weekly, sorry, saw his resume and asked him to do a story about the Hare Krishna people, because there was a temple in Brooklyn, which was a borough of New York City. So we lived in the Brooklyn temple. I wrote the article, and my then boyfriend, now husband, took the pictures. And it was eventually published in Asian magazine. So he was very intrigued by the Hare Krishna people, very attracted. And he decided to do his master's thesis on the Hare Krishna people. So at this time, this was 1970, and Prabhupada had first left the US to go to India with a small group of his disciples, his Western disciples, to reintroduce the original culture of India in India. So my then boyfriend, now husband, joined him there. And it was quite amazing because the people of India are very much turning to Western values, Western habits, turning away from their own culture. And here they find young Westerners wearing dhoti and sari and playing traditional instruments and chanting Sanskrit mantras. So they were completely enthralled, the people of India. They couldn't actually believe their eyes. They were so astonished to see this sight. So they would come to see Srila Prabhupada by the tens of thousands. And Prabhupada would say, they're seeing me, but they actually want to see these foreign disciples. They were so taken, enthralled by it. So we know Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in the last two centuries ago, he predicted that one day the Russians, the Americans, the Chinese would come together to chant the holy names of the Lord. And here in this photograph we can see there's someone from Africa, there's Banu, at that time Das Brahmachari, now a very learned and famous sannyasi. And on the left is Tamal Krishna, at that time a Grihastha, all coming together under Prabhupada's influence to try to change this whole drift of India from westernization back to the original culture. The devotees would travel by train throughout India, and when the train stopped at a station, they would jump out and have Harinam on the platform. And again, the people would come around, just couldn't believe their eyes. The chai wallahs were not very happy. They lost a lot of business. But the people were just, again, taken by the devotees' enthusiasm in Krishna consciousness. So we were invited at that time to Surat, and that was, although all the experiences in India at this time were extraordinary, this was extraordinarily extraordinary. You probably know Surat and Gujarat in general is such a pious state. But in Surat, the mayor of the town closed the schools and factories. And every morning, the route that the Harinam party would go on, the streets they would go on, was published in the newspaper. And people would line the streets to see the devotees on Harinam. And as you can see, they would garland them. They would offer incense to them. So this is my then boyfriend, now husband, Yadubara Prabhu. At that time he was John. So he was photographing this phenomena. He had also, as I mentioned, photographed in New York. And in New York, the passers-by would see the Harinam party, and they would say, "Get a job." So here, this is a street in Surat that they blocked off and put a platform at one end. And they would hang saris over the street to protect the devotees from the strong sunshine. And they would honor the devotees. That's Malati receiving the garland there. There she is. Prabhupada would take his walks as he did everywhere that he went. And here behind him is a devotee named Durlab, who's teaching the Boy Scouts how to chant. And Durlab had a movie camera. You could see it there hanging off his wrist. He also filmed at that time, so we do have some 8mm film of the devotees in Surat. Prabhupada was tireless. He would have 3 programs a day. Sometimes the devotees would be invited to people's homes for prasadam 3 times a day, which wasn't very good for their health. Every morning there would be Mangal Arti in Prabhupada's small room, and it was usually led by Jamuna Prabhu, who was on the right there. Yadavar said these were the most intense Mangal Artis he's ever been to. And everywhere they would ask Prabhupada to speak, and he would speak with such emphasis, practically calling out to the devotees, to the people, to turn back to their original culture. It's so rich, it's so fulfilling, to stop turning to the West, which was empty. So there was a Mr. Jariwala who hosted the devotees in Surat. He gave them his whole house. He had a 3-story home. And he moved into a small bungalow next door to his home, he and his family. And every day he would arrange for the cooking and he would personally serve the devotees. And before they left, he came to them in Prabhupada's presence and he very humbly said, "If I've committed any offenses, please forgive me." This is after he'd been serving the devotees constantly for all the time they were there. And Prabhupada turned to the devotees and he said, "This is Vaishnava." So they went to Allahabad for Kumbh Mela. And again, Prabhupada would take his morning walks, even in the cold morning air. They would have Harinam as they walked. You could see Giriraj Swami. He's in the back, covered by a blanket on the right side. And this very enthusiastic person would come every day and yell, "Jai Srila Prabhupada." And Prabhupada would smile, appreciate his enthusiasm. Saraswati was also there, Shamsundar and Malati's daughter. You could see her on the shoulders of Shamsundar Prabhu. There she is. And although Prabhupada could have lived in a comfortable situation, he lived with the devotees. Took a bath out of a bucket. He had the same austerities that his disciples had, which was very encouraging for his disciples because it was quite austere conditions. Then they decided to go to the Rupa Goswami Gaudiya Math in Allahabad. Prabhupada had lived in Allahabad when he had his pharmaceutical business. And he personally supported this Gaudiya Math with donations from his business, and he would speak there as well. So the deities inside the Gaudiya Math. We also went to Gorakhpur. There was a celebration in honor of Lord Chaitanya there. On the lower left, you could see Jayapataka Swami. One of Prabhupada's Western disciples made this shirt for him, which is very Western, but he accepted it and wore it. So this is in Mumbai, the gateway of India. John Yadubara Prabhu was on the right-hand side. You can see Giriraj at the time, Das Brahmachari, also there. So in Mumbai, the devotees arranged for the Pandal, 1971. It was about a 10-day Pandal, and they had it in Cross Maidan, which is the heart of Mumbai. And people would come after work to hear Srila Prabhupada, to see the devotees participating in deity worship and kirtan. And the Pandal accommodated 10,000, but Indian style it could go to 15 and even 20,000 as people packed in. And they would listen with rapt attention, so much appreciation, as the devotees did what they do in all the temples in ISKCON, but here they were doing it for the public. Prabhupada gave very forceful talks every evening. Again, just imploring the people to turn to the original teachings of Bhagavad Gita, to turn back to Krishna. The last day of the Pandal, they had this wedding ceremony. That's when we had 20,000 people. The Indian people just love weddings. So the young man was from Sweden and the young lady was from Australia. And Prabhupada, when he lectured, he mentioned this. And then he said, this is the real United Nations. And 20,000 people cheered at one time. It was tumultuous. So as a term project in college, I had done a study of close-up photography. And I took this term paper to a publisher in Manhattan, and he turned it into this book, Photomicrography is Close-Up Photography. So John, my then boyfriend, now husband, had been writing to me and invited me to come to India. So I came in time for this Pandal program. And then we met Srila Prabhupada. John and I went to his room in Mumbai, and I had a copy of the book with me. So John took it from me and handed it to Srila Prabhupada. And he looked through the book, page by page. It wasn't long, maybe 125 pages. And I could see by the way that he looked at the book, he knew everything about book publishing. He examined the quality of the cover, the binding, the paper, the printing. Very knowledgeable. You could see just by the way that he handled it. And it was beautiful. He had very long Brahminical fingers turning the pages. And then he handed it back to us. He said, we do not know much about these things. And I think he was referring to the close-up photography, but he knew everything about book publishing. So we wandered around Mumbai and took photojournalist-type pictures of the activities there, the scenes. And we also traveled a little in India. It was quite fascinating to see the culture that was so different from our Western culture. And quite unusual too, some very unusual scenes. What really strikes me about this picture is the people behind are more interested in the photographer than in the yogi. Then it was very hot at that time of year, so we went to Nepal and started trekking up the Himalayas. And that was amazing because it's such an extraordinarily beautiful place, Nepal. Mystical in some ways. We came to 10,000 feet. At that time of the year, that was the snow line. And we decided to rest in this little structure for a few days. And then from the bottom of his backpack, John pulled out a blue paperback and he handed that to me and said, "You should read this." That was the abridged version of Bhagavad Gita as it is. So I love to read, and I sat there around this pristine environment, and I tried to read Bhagavad Gita as it is, the abridged version. And although I loved to read, I could not make head nor tail of this book. I just couldn't figure it out. But at the same time, I had a strong sense that this book could give me knowledge and direction and guidance that would really help me in my life. So again, it was quite a mystical experience for me. Then we went to Vrindavan, and I had the wonderful fortune of photographing in Vrindavan for a month, and especially the widows of Vrindavan. They would chant the Hare Krishna mantra every morning in some of the temples. They didn't chant as we chant. There were about 150 where I was photographing. Half of them would sing and the other half would listen, and they would reverse. And it wasn't very musical. It's not like they had exceptional voices, and the mridangas and kartals were there, but they weren't played really expertly. And yet I was very moved by it because I could feel how much faith they had and how much sincerity and how they were depending on Krishna. And the rest of the day in the afternoon, I would see them giving water to pilgrims and sharing their bread even with the animals. The way I grew up, the way I was trained is you get a good education. Why? So you could get a good job. Why do you want a good job? So you could have a lot of money. Why do you want a lot of money? For comforts, prestige, power. And I saw people in my youth who had all those things. They had a good education, they had money, they had comforts, they had influence, and yet their lives were not fulfilled. They were unhappy, to put it rather mildly. So I was quite confused because I didn't want to go in that direction. And then I saw these ladies who were so pious, and they didn't have high education, they didn't have a lot of money, they certainly didn't have comforts, prestige, power, nothing. And yet they had a sense of fulfillment that was tangible. So I really had to stop and think about my own life and my own values. Everything in Vrindavan was imbued with devotion. So John was coming closer and closer to Krishna, very attracted to the devotees, to the process, to Srila Prabhupada. You can see him selling Back to Godhead magazine. He's lost his mustache. And then we went to Calcutta. There was just time for Vyasa Puja for Srila Prabhupada. And Gurudas asked us to make an all-India Vyasa Puja book to honor Srila Prabhupada with offerings from the devotees who were in India. And it was there that Yadabar got initiated by Srila Prabhupada in front of Sri Sri Radha Govinda. After that, there was another pandal in Delhi. So here Prabhupada is just getting off the airplane. He's greeted by the governor of Uttar Pradesh, by the mayor of Delhi. At this point, he had become famous throughout India. And again, the second pandal in Delhi, an incredible success. Every night, a different dignitary would introduce Srila Prabhupada. The High Commissioner of Canada came, one of the Supreme Court justices came, the governor of Uttar Pradesh, the mayor. And it was our standard program of kirtan, arti, lecture, prasadam distribution. So this is Sri Sri Radha Gokulananda. They were worshipped in Delhi at this time. This time they were Radha Krishna before Srila Prabhupada named them. And again, Prabhupada was tireless, imploring the people of India to turn to Krishna. And after Delhi, he took us to Vrindavan, just a small group of us. Here he is at the Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan in the courtyard. You see Saraswati is there, and her parents. He showed us around the Radha Damodar temple. There are many bhajan kutirs and samadhis. And he also took us to Barsana. As you know, there's many steps to go up to the temple in Barsana. So Prabhupada was going to take this palanquin, and the devotees said, well, it shouldn't be carried by these palanquin carriers, it should be carried by Prabhupada's disciples. But there's an art to everything, including carrying a palanquin. And when the disciples tried to carry the palanquin, Prabhupada was swaying back and forth. So he said, that's all right, let the professionals. And here he was telling the story of Krishna eating dirt and of the Asuri's reaction. And the devotees were bathing in the Jamuna, and Prabhupada first, he's sitting on the left there. He said the water's very cold. He was an old man. Cold water wasn't good for an old man. But then he changed his mind and went in with the devotees. This in the center is Bhagaji. He was a great friend of Srila Prabhupada. They had a very loving relationship. And he helped tremendously with the development of the Krishna Balaram temple and helping individual devotees also. He lived just nearby the Krishna Balaram temple. I was there on the left in the corner, photographing. So in Vrindavan we became married. Prabhupada married us. And we were the photographers for the group, my husband and I. And during our wedding, we were busy. We had to collect the wood and do all sorts of things to prepare. We didn't think about photographing. So in the middle of the ceremony, Malati rushed up to me and said, where's your camera? So I handed her my camera. So she took this photograph. It's the only photograph we have of our wedding. And we teased our daughters because when they got married, there are hundreds of photographs, videos, everything from every possible angle. But we have one. Prabhupada was actually sitting on the dais on the left there. And he would take us on walks around Vrindavan. We also were invited to Jaipur by the Queen of Jaipur. This is in Jaipur. And there was this glorious procession on the bullock cart, which Srila Prabhupada was just magnificent to see him honored in that way through the streets of Jaipur. This is Mayapur. The beginning of the development of ISKCON Mayapur. Prabhupada stayed in this thatched hut, which is still there today. Now there's 24-hour kirtan there. And he would go for walks along Bhaktisiddhanta Road. We also had a pandal in Mayapur for Gaur Purnima. And he was going to lay the foundation for the temple of the Vedic Planetarium. And Prabhupada invited his godbrothers to come from Mayapur. There were many Gaudiya Maths, and quite a few of them came. And Prabhupada went down this very deep pit, it must have been 12 foot deep, to laid 64 auspicious items, including a small gold seshanag with gems for his eyes. It was just an inch high, but solid gold. Is also in this pit. And here, my husband and I received a Brahminical initiation. Behind is Pishima, Prabhupada's sister. You can see her in the back there, a little bit blurry. She looked very much like Srila Prabhupada. And there's a famous story how Prabhupada saw children fighting for scraps from used leaf plates, and he became very moved by that, and he asked the devotees to make free prasadam daily to feed all the villagers. So many, many villagers used to come, very nutritious khichdi, hot khichdi, and every day the devotees would cook and serve. This is Juhu, again, beginnings of another enormous project. And again, there was another pandal in Juhu. It was at this time that Prabhupada introduced singing the Sri Guru Charanapadma prayers. Before that, we hadn't done that. But in Juhu, around March of 1972, Prabhupada introduced this song, which is now standard throughout ISKCON, part of the morning program. A very powerful song. This is Haridas getting initiation. Haridas has an unusual history. He was a pickpocket in Mumbai, and he was arrested at one point, was in jail for pickpocketing, and somehow he saw Back to Godhead in the jail. And we know on the Back to Godhead cover there's a logo with Srila Prabhupada. He has his finger raised, making a point, and he's wearing a watch. So Haridas noticed the watch. And when he got out of jail, he desired to have that watch. So he actually went to Juhu. My husband and I met him there. We gave him beads and told him about chanting. And eventually he met Srila Prabhupada and told him, I want your watch. So Prabhupada actually took his watch off and gave it to him. And Haridas became transformed in Juhu, became, as you can see, a disciple, very devoted to Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada gave him an unusual service at one point. Prabhupada would translate early in the morning, 2 and 3 in the morning, and for some reasons the dogs would bark at that time. One dog would bark, and another dog would answer, and a third dog, and it was like a chorus of barking dogs. And that broke Prabhupada's concentration, his focus. So he told Haridas, you go around and stop these dogs from barking. So every morning, 2 in the morning, Haridas would be there with a stick. And he was successful, the dog, as a service to Srila Prabhupada. He also became very active in ISKCON television in Mumbai. He would make films and send them all over India of the activities of the Hare Krishna movement. After the arti, they would bring the Mahaprasadam out for Srila Prabhupada, and he would distribute it personally. There would be a queue, and the children would come up and they would receive some Mahaprasadam in their hand. Prabhupada put it in quite forcefully. It was not a gentle thing. There it was. So they would eat that and go to the back of the queue and come up again. And Prabhupada would see them and go like this, but still they would get more. They would get seconds and even thirds. And he also mentioned at one point that wealthy people from Juhu, they had chauffeurs and, homes, fancy homes, but they would also stand humbly in the queue because they knew the value of Mahaprasadam. And here he's laying the cornerstone for the beautiful temple that would come up in Juhu. So at this time, we had so many temples throughout the world, and people in one temple, the devotees in one temple, were not aware of what the devotees in another temple were doing. We didn't have the communication facility that we have today. So one leading devotee, Karandar Prabhu, said we need a film of all the activities of ISKCON throughout the world. And there was no cinematographer in ISKCON at the time. So he went to us as photographers and said, we need a film. So we looked at all the existing footage, my husband and I, and there wasn't enough to make a complete portrait of ISKCON at that time. So with Prabhupada's help, he actually gave us $16,000 from his Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, which is very unusual because it's supposed to be for temples and books. But Prabhupada was very aware of the power of film. So we bought a camera and we started traveling to film ISKCON throughout the world. This is the camera. It had what's called a duffel on it to try to dampen the sound. It was quite noisy. So in order not to bother people, bother Prabhupada when he was lecturing or translating, we put this contraption over it. Very heavy and ungainly. And I would carry this reel-to-reel tape recorder, and then we had to sync up the visual with the sound. You had to, it's all very antique today. At this time it was state-of-the-art. And then we'd have to roll it through by hand to get the 24 frames per second, which was never quite right, but did our best. So this became this half-hour film, Hare Krishna people. These are scenes from this film. This is the warehouse for books in Los Angeles. The devotees were distributing so many books at this time, it was phenomenal. We had access to airports, and the devotees could go, they were empowered, they could go and distribute 100 Bhagavad Gitas in the airport, one person. And these books were shipped all over the world. There was tremendous momentum. It's a shipping container full of Srila Prabhupada's books. It's Los Angeles initiation. And here he's returned to India, India's national hero. Yeah, so this is another part of the film. This is in New Vrindavan, the first farming community. When the cows were called to the barn, they would jog down this hill. And in the film, how many of you have seen the Hare Krishna people film? Anyone? Just a few. It's on YouTube. It's called Hare Krishna Film Classics. You can see if you have an interest. But this was done to slow motion. When they're coming down the hill, the cows, it was in slow motion. So we were on a walk with Srila Prabhupada in Tirupati, and he mentioned this particular scene in the film. Prabhupada saw this film, the number of times we counted was 14. Because he would give a lecture and then it would be the film. We always expected he's had a long day translating, walking, answering letters, meeting with people. So we thought he'd go back to his room and rest, but he would sit and for this half-hour film and see it again and again. So he mentioned this particular scene. He says, those cows coming down the hill, why are they floating? Because in slow motion it looks like they're floating. So, and he said, can that be corrected? So we were in complete anxiety, my husband and I, because the film was released, and to change it at that point would be very expensive. So my husband said, Srila Prabhupada, that's a technique in film called slow motion. And Prabhupada said, then it is all right. Thank you. So this was also at the end of the film. This is the installation of Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda. Prabhupada offered the bhoga to the Lord, and then he did the whole arti, offering all the items with such grace. And then he started circumambulating. At that time he could actually go behind Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda. So he started circumambulating and he invited all the devotees from the temple room to come with him. So all the devotees were circumambulating with him. And after the third time he went around, he raised his arms and started to jump. And so the devotees just went totally wild. And that was the end of the Hare Krishna film. So yes, if there's some Thoughts, comments about that? This is more or less the end of the presentation. We were still photographers. We really had no experience filming. So this was our first major attempt at filming the installation of Sri Radha Gokulananda. And on the flight from New York to Heathrow, we were reading the instruction books, how to use the camera, how to use the recording equipment. Sorry, yeah, please.
Thank you so much, Mataji, for this amazing journey. I felt I was there. It's beautiful. There is one pastime where you mentioned once about in Kolkata, the kind of transformation you went through to surrender your life to Srila Prabhupada, because you were a little not sure, and then something happened. Prabhupada said something in Kolkata in a class about he endeavoring. So would you, if you don't mind, can you just share that inner transformation that you went through and your journey and your struggle, and then how you surrendered to Prabhupada in Kolkata, something like that, something vaguely I remember, but I'll be grateful if you can share.
Yeah. So I was raised in an atheistic family. My mother was part of the Roman Catholic Church here in the UK. My father was raised Jewish, very strict Jewish. And they both felt that there was so much ritual, but no real substance to their traditions, so they both gave up religion completely. So my brother and I, we never went to any synagogue or temple or church our whole lives growing up. So I was quite fixed in my atheism, and yet, as I mentioned, I felt a certain emptiness, a certain vacuum in my heart, especially seeing people that excelled in the Western world, whose lives were unhappy, to put it rather mildly. So yeah, I had this confusion about the purpose of life, what I should be doing with my life. And although I wasn't looking for spirituality, when I met the devotees, I was very moved. And by meeting Srila Prabhupada and his conviction and the way everything was so logically presented by him. And then circumstances had it, Prabhupada asked my husband and I to go, or he suggested, I would say, that we go to Vrindavan to photograph. So I mentioned after Nepal, we went to Vrindavan for photography. And it was there, I like to say, I entered Vrindavan as an atheist and I left as a theist. Because it was such an impactful, and no one preached to me, because there were only two people that spoke English, and they didn't preach, and everyone else I couldn't really communicate. But it was just being in that situation that was saturated with devotion, saturated with faith, saturated with seva, service for Krishna. So that was transformative, so that when we went from Vrindavan to Calcutta, I was more open to hearing. And when Srila Prabhupada spoke, he first arrived in Calcutta, and the Calcutta temple was in a very sad state at that time. The devotees were all foreigners. They're in a culture that they're not familiar with. They didn't speak the language properly, trying to function. And as a result of that, the temple was not convincingly clean. And the devotees were not well. They were unhealthy, sick. And they were not getting along with each other. They were fighting with each other. And so there I was. I had some attraction to Srila Prabhupada and his message, and but I didn't really want to be in a dirty temple with devotees that were fighting with each other. So I had been to college for 2 years, and there were 2 more years left to go. So I started filling out the form. I'd taken a break. I started filling out a form to go back to college for the final 2 years. And one of my, well, she wasn't a god sister then, but one of Prabhupada's disciples came to me and said, she knew my directions, she said, "You can't leave now because Srila Prabhupada's coming." So that became my mantra. It was not the Hare Krishna mantra. My mantra was, I can't leave now because Prabhupada's coming. So I was holding on by a thread, a frayed thread in this situation. And then after some time, after a month or two, Srila Prabhupada did come. And he looked out, he sat on the Vyasasana, he took darshan, walked around the temple room, sat in his Vyasasana and looked out at his bedraggled Calcutta crew, tired and unwell and arguing with each other. And he immediately knew that this required Krishna consciousness. So he spoke very beautifully about the environment of Vrindavan, the mentality of the Vrindavan residents, and how it was all centered around Krishna and harmonious, although each was an individual, because they were harmonious in their desire to please Krishna, there was unity amidst the diversity. So it was very, very moving, because I had so much appreciated the Vrindavan atmosphere that to hear him speak about it was very, gave me a lot of solace. And then he called the very next day, he wanted an Istagosti in his room. He has the same room today in Calcutta as he did then, 3 Albert Road. So we all went into his room after breakfast prashad. We all filed in. Prabhupada looked around, and there was a devotee missing. So he said, where is she? And so he waited until they found her, and she came, so that everyone was there. And then he spoke just as he speaks in Bhagavad Gita, about how we're not the body, we're part and parcel of Krishna. We have an eternal loving relationship with Krishna that we have the opportunity now to revive. So I was hearing this, and it was all very fresh and new, and it made so much sense to me. It was so attractive to me. And then he spoke also about austerity. And he didn't mention that he had come alone to the U.S. with no money. He didn't mention that he had heart attacks on the boat twice. He had a third one, he thought he would die. He didn't mention any of those austerities. Being robbed in New York, having to run out from a drug-addicted hippie who was threatening him. So many things he could have said about austerity. But what he mentioned was that he had to share his refrigerator with someone who kept meat in that refrigerator. That's the austerity that he mentioned at that time. For someone who's a Vaishnava, a Brahmin, Vaishnava, to share your refrigerator with someone who keeps meat in it was the austerity beyond everything else that he had gone through. So it was when I entered his room for this Istagosti, I felt like Atlas carrying the burden of the earth on my shoulders with all the troubles in the temple. But when I left after hearing Prabhupada, it was like I was floating. Like I wasn't even touching the ground. That was the power of Srila Prabhupada's words and his conviction and his faith. So it was transformative for me. So then the next stop, Vrindavan, after Delhi we went to Vrindavan, so I became initiated there.
Thank you.
It's a long-winded answer.
No, beautiful. Thank you.
At that time, you had to establish Vedic culture, ISKCON values, temples, okay. Now we are a generation, the world is going on and we have to work and practice devotion. And Prabhupada worked all his life and practiced devotion. What message did he give to that subject? Prabhupada was working all his life and he had family and he practiced devotion. So I'm coming from very young age and I got spiritual life and I got my work, but I feel, I still needed spiritual support.
There's no contradiction. Certainly Prabhupada encouraged his young followers to give 100%, become brahmacharis, brahmacharinis, even the grihastas, they didn't work in Prabhupada's time. They gave 100% to the movement and they were provided for, simply, but they were provided for. And yet, you see in India, there were so many people who were working, like Mr. Jariwala was one, but they would help the devotees, they would become life members, they would participate in kirtans, they would have gatherings in their homes. So both things, there's no contradiction. You can surrender everything, give your life, become brahmachari, brahmacharini, full-time engaged. And then after some time, those people, brahmachari, brahmacharinis, very often they decide they want to enter grihastha ashram. So then they can work, but they still come to the temple, they raise their children as devotees. It embraces everyone, Krishna consciousness, whatever ashram or varna that you might be in.
Yes, my Guru Maharaj encouraged us to work. And I just got up at 5, chanted the mala and went to work. We just came to temple on Sunday and did service.
Yeah, it's glorious. It's glorious. You can have a temple in your home, and every morning before
Yes,
you go to
temple.
work, you chant japa, you read Srila Prabhupada's books, and kirtan. That's the beauty of it. It encompasses everyone in all walks of life, old, young, working, full-time devotee, everything. Is that okay?
Thank you.
For the nice presentation. I just had a quick question because you were speaking about when we saw the picture of all the books stored, you were speaking about the momentum which was there at that time. So I was just wondering if you have any reflections on how maybe as a society but also as individuals we can work towards building such a momentum again nowadays.
Yeah, at that time in the 70s, under Prabhupada's guidance, as I mentioned, people gave 100%, to the point they would be, in the airport distributing books from early morning to late night. Many hundreds and hundreds of devotees would be doing that. So we could see Prabhupada's example that he gave 100%. So we wanted to reciprocate with that, with his dedication, with his love. So the devotees, they did reciprocate fully. That was the pioneering stage of ISKCON. Now perhaps it's a little more established. But still, the idea of dedicating fully, even if we're working, we have children, whatever it may be, we can still in our hearts. That's Krishna's instruction, always think of me. Never forget me. So that's what he wants from all of us. And then how we manifest our Krishna consciousness in the temple or at home, that's quite individual. But still, the dedication can be there fully. Still. It's a matter of being Arya too, I think. Thank you so much for your attention. You're a very attentive audience. I think it's about time now. Oh, we still have time. Are there any other comments or thoughts?
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for taking us through the journey, through your amazing journey. The one picture that it really struck me, the warehouse with so many books. I used to think that the book distribution at the Bhaktivedanta Manor has grown tremendously in the recent years. But comparing the warehouse that you had and comparing the warehouse that it is, and at least I don't get the impression that it has grown tremendously, or in fact, I would be surprised if it has probably gone down. Is there something that, do you feel that we need to increase the book distribution, we need to put in more efforts for this particular effort, which is so pleasing to Srila Prabhupada? Otherwise you wouldn't have had such a massive warehouse at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mother.
Thank you. Yeah, Prabhupada, there's no question that he was very pleased and enlivened to see his books go out. And we've distributed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of millions of books, really, since 1970. And yet, I also feel that with every book, it's very unrealistic for the vast majority of people that they will get one book and be transformed in their hearts. It takes a village. So to me, every time we give out a book, we should also give out a way for people to connect with devotees, to connect with the temple, to connect with the Sangha, to continue their journey, right? Just like in December Marathon, we were very active in distributing books throughout the UK. And with every book we had a bookmark, and it invited people to Bhaktivedanta Manor on a certain date, a certain Sunday or Saturday in January, for a full day's experience of this culture. And we had 200 people come. And they could experience prasadam, kirtan, a little philosophy, some yoga. They saw the cows, they saw the temple room, they saw Prabhupada. So in other words, it was an immersive experience for them, which will help them on their spiritual journey. So for me, yes, the books should go out. They should go out en masse. And with every book, there should be a way for people to continue associating with devotees, to continue their Krishna conscious experience. Yeah.